Welcome to my channel. I'm Chastity and this is Corporate Audacity, a channel where we discuss the audacity of corporations, the perils and triumphs of working in the corporate world. In today's video, we'll discuss a Reddit post by a recruiter gone rogue. While I was working on our next video about at-will employment, coming soon, I happened upon this post by a recruiter who was recently laid off and decided to anonymously spill all the hot tea about his time as a recruiter for an unnamed company. And I knew I had to share it with you guys. What really piqued my interest is that the recruiter, who uses the name Contemptible Cheater, decides to lift the veil of the hiring process and open himself up for questions stating, "Ask me anything about how companies really hire." Quick caveat, I will be referring to the recruiter as a he, but I do not know their actual gender. I'll link the entire post in the description for this video so you can read it for yourself. With that said, let's take a peek at this post and see what's really happening on the inside of a company when you apply for a job. One Reddit user poses a series of questions to the recruiter gone rogue. Seeking Peelers asks, "Do computers just read the resumes and forward the ones containing the magic words?" The recruiter's response is, sometimes yes. Most recruiting software has some kind of AI ML attachment that highlights profiles that meet your searches. Most recruiting is done via Boolean searches, which is just asking a database to find certain terms. The ones with the most keywords show up on top. Okay, this is very interesting. Headhunters, job coaches, and resume writers have often preached to job seekers about tailoring their resumes to the job description. But we don't always heed their advice, often submitting a one-size-fit-all resume. Welp, here's the proof, folks. The recruiter is telling us that they use AI software to scan resumes for keywords from the job description. Here's the second question from user Seeking Peelers. They ask, "Do cover letters have to be so formal and traditional?" Take a look at Contemptible Cheater's answer to this. He says, "I genuinely don't read cover letters and don't know anyone who does that isn't an idiot." I knew it. I knew they didn't read that crap. The recruiter goes on to say, "Use ChatGPT and don't waste your time on them. Nobody cares. They aren't passing on you for a bad cover letter." Listen, I don't usually submit them at all. If the application requires it for you to move on to the next step, I usually take a snippet of my resume objective and copy and paste it into the cover letter field. Add a "thanks for your consideration" at the end and keep it pushing. Ain't nobody got time for that in this day and age. Moving on to the third question from user Seeking Peelers. They ask, aside from applying on the job board, what else can one do for a specific role they really want that's posted? Ooh, good question, Peelers. Let's see what the recruiter has to say. Cheater says, building connections. Ain't that the truth? We talked about this in our last video, Payless penny pinching, and touched on it in the remote working video series as well. The recruiter goes on to say, employment in general is stupid. It's the barista problem in every industry. How can I become a barista if they only hire people who were baristas? That's every job ever. His solution is to build connections and go from there. It won't be fair or meritocratic. If you're in technical work or engineering, networking is even more valuable. So I'll say again, winning at the employment game is not about what you know, but who you know. Let's keep going. The fourth and final question from Seeking Peelers is, how does one successfully pivot careers without connections and just through the company's career page? This is a great question. What do you say, Cheater? Well, he says, you probably won't, to be honest. I've been trying to change careers for a while. You have a better chance transferring within a company than outside a company. He closes by saying you could lie about your experience and learn as you go. Hiring is not fair, so don't play fair. Wow. Now, I wouldn't recommend you lie about your experience. That could backfire, but I agree that it's extremely difficult to change careers and even harder to do it later in life. Age is a major factor in the employment game. which the recruiter talks about in his response to this next Reddit user. User name not take yet asks, what is considered job hopping nowadays for white-collar professionals, besides the obvious 2 jobs in 1 year? How much employment change for an applicant is seen as problematic for potential employers? Is there a ratio? Sheeter says, I have seen job hopping concerns for as high as 3 years per company, but this is relatively rare. Some companies value tenure more. He goes on to say, look on LinkedIn at their previous hires for the role you are going for and see how you align. Also, companies are ageist. You didn't exist 10 years ago. Your experience from back then is irrelevant. Don't put it out there. I followed this advice myself and gave out this same advice recently to another job seeker. It's great that you have 20 years of experience, and though the federal government wants to see all of it, private companies apparently do not. It almost seems to work against you to have too many years in the game. Go figure. User ML Racer asks the recruiter, would you agree this is the worst economy in a long time? I know I took nearly a 50% pay cut just to stay employed. This is interesting because Corporate Audacity just discussed this in our last video called Payless penny pinching. Check that video out for further context. I'll link it below. Sheeter responds to ML Racer saying, the economy is not built with laborers' interest in mind, and we should stop thinking of it as something that should be good or worse for us. It is intentionally designed to be worse for you than the ownership class. They could give a shit whether you think it's good or bad, as long as you do nothing about it. Whether the economy is good or bad, it will always be worse for you. He goes on to say, yeah, things aren't looking great. We're getting guided into a recession and will sacrifice a few million livelihoods in order to reduce instability and profit taking. Wow. I have to agree with the rogue recruiter in this instance. No matter how grim it sounds, it is the absolute truth. That's why we will be doing a video on at-will employment, something corporations thrive on in this country. The ability to lay off or fire at any time for any reason. They can literally dump hundreds or thousands of workers if they notice their stock price is falling. Holding up appearances to appease stockholders and providing a false sense of economic stability. The last question we're going to look at is from Dreadsbo. She asked the recruiter, how often is race or culture a factor? Good question, Dreadsbo. According to Sheeter, often, honestly. He goes on to say, ageism is bigger. Some people hate certain races or cultures, but nearly everyone hates the old. When I worked in an agency, I had some companies explicitly tell me to not bring them black people. Or some that would skirt around it and say, we don't want urban talk here. Ew, that's nasty work. Sheeter continues saying, I'd refuse to work with them. My boss would threaten to fire me if I didn't. Big part of why I got out of there. I regret not whistleblowing. It's everywhere and an open secret. Now, even though the recruiter is telling us he witnessed blatant illegal racism in the hiring process, some folks will still say that racism doesn't exist. Although that's painful to hear, Sheeter offers an alternative that puts the minorities at a greater advantage in certain industries. He says, specific to the tech industry, it's the opposite. There is explicit discrimination in favor of hiring women, blacks, and Latinos, with some favor in hiring Native Americans and veterans. As a recruiter, I have been held to quotas to engage those groups. Let's pass on this resume. Oh, wait, this candidate is a woman. Bring them in. This is all very intriguing because it's something that you kind of know in the back of your mind, but can't really prove. What Sheeter doesn't say, though, is that they will bring in all these minority candidates for interviews, meet their quota of consideration, and have zero intention to hire them. That's a big waste of the recruiter's time and the candidate's time. Well, this brings us to the end of our video. The recruiter gone rogue has already shut down his Q&A session. I'm glad he took the time to give us an inside look into the hiring process and answer some of the questions we've been dying to know the answer to. In some instances, just validating what we already know. So, Contemptible Cheater, thank you for your service. Now that you, the viewer, are armed with this information, use it. Use it to make changes to your own job seeking and application processes. We must learn to play the game and win at it. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this recruiter spilling the beans. Remember to subscribe and get your notifications so you're front and center for our next video where we discuss at-will employment. Like the video if you liked the video and share it with a friend. Once again, this is Chastity with Corporate Audacity. Thanks for watching.